We're going to get started. I'm Emily Kornheiser. I'm a representative, represent West Brattleboro and then a small strip of Canal Street where it hits Route 5 in Guilford, which is called District 1. Oh, I am echoing a lot all of a sudden. That's exciting. Few quick announcements before we get started. There's bathrooms there, and then you can also take the elevator up to near the children's room for further bathrooms. Star would like me to tell everyone that library cards are available for free to all Brattleboro residents. So please, if you don't have a library card, get a library card before you leave. I'm going to add to our announcement that the library has gotten rid of fees, which were a major source of stress for me. And I am really enjoying my library time more now that the fees are gone. Thank you for coming. We're here to talk about break-ins and sort of feelings of safety in the community and experiences of safety in the community. We have a really great panel here today to talk through a number of issues. So we're going to start, I'm going to ask each panelist to go through 4 specific questions. I'll tell you what they are in a minute. And then we have a few more representatives from the select board and from the State House who are also going to ask to pipe in. There are so many of us that were sort of interested in coming and talking to you about this issue today that the panel would have become unwieldy. And we also have a select board race. And so wanted to sort of, we have Brandy here from the select board, but we also have a lot more select board members. And I wanted to be careful in the middle of an election to not sort of highlight one person's voice more than other people. And Brandy is not up for re-election this year. However, voting is open until 12 o'clock today if you want to go over to the municipal center and vote afterwards. So we'll wrap up in time for you to do that if you're interested. Right now, I'm going to hand this over to our town manager, Peter, who's going to make a few more announcements.
Thank you, Emily. So actually, just one more. I was also going to encourage you to vote if you haven't yet, or if you'd like to do that without having to go in on Tuesday morning if that's less convenient for you. But thank you very much for reminding everyone that that's available this morning. And we also want to give a quick update about what's happening here in Brattleboro regarding COVID-19. You might have heard about it that way. You might more likely have heard about it as coronavirus. It's pretty much all over the media these days. Nationally, there are other sort of more immediate implications. But in Vermont and here in Brattleboro, we wanted to let you know that we are preparing in case there is an outbreak here, and there are some things that you can do to protect yourselves, and together we can do to protect each other. But the main thing to do is to stay informed, because right now it's not an immediate threat here in Vermont. There have been no cases. There are no current cases of COVID-19 in Vermont. But the State Health Department is going to be daily updating their COVID-19 section of their website. And we put a link to that on the town's website. So if you go to brattleboro.org and over on the right-hand side of the homepage where there's the sort of more current, more urgent things going on, we rotate things through in that news section. Right at the top is where you can click on connecting to the Vermont Health Department's daily updating of what's going on in Vermont. And they just had a big news conference in Montpelier yesterday where the Commissioner of Health advised everyone that there are 27 people in Vermont who are currently being monitored, who are staying at home and being tracked to make sure that they don't have it, or if they do, that they get proper care and stay out of public spaces. And there have been 15 other people who have already been monitored through the complete monitoring period and been found not to have it and are back in circulation. So the advice at this point is just the practical, good, common sense flu season advice. Wash your hands a lot. Don't touch your face. Be mindful of if you start feeling poorly, stay home, and don't spend much time around other people who are ill unless it's a family member or someone you have to be with to take good care of them. But just the basic good hygiene things that we do in the winter to try to stay healthy is what's appropriate for right now. And if this becomes a more imminent threat in Vermont, then the health department is going to be certainly making sure we're all aware of it. Here in town, what we're doing is the kinds of things we do around these sorts of issues just as preparedness, where the first responders are stocking up on certain kinds of supplies that we don't normally need as much of, but might need it if there is an outbreak. And we're rechecking plans and communicating a lot with the hospital and Rescue Inc. and folks like that, just so that we're all ready in case this does become something we have to deal with. So, thank you for taking time for that. We thought it was high of visibility as that issue is around the country right now, that it would be good for everybody to be aware of what's happening here closer to home. And I'm going to get out of the way now so that you can have the discussion you've come for.
Thanks, Peter. So I handed out pads of paper and pens to people because we're going to do a lot of talking at the beginning. And as a person who always has a lot of questions, I know that I get a little frustrated when there's a lot of talking and I have my questions sort of sitting on the tip of my tongue. And so encourage you to write those questions down. We'll get to them at the end. I'm also going to collect them. So if you're a person who doesn't like asking your question with your own mouth, I'm happy to ask your question for you as you pass that up. And so those are sort of a few options for how we're going to do this at the end. So we're going to go through 4 questions that I'm going to ask the panel to answer. They're about perspectives, what is actually happening right now in the community, root causes, why is this happening now, sort of in a national context, in the context of our community. What is the separate role, jurisdiction, so what's the separate role of town, state, national in solving a problem like this? And then solutions. What works to make a difference on this problem that everyone has come on a Saturday morning to talk about? And so we're going to answer those 4 questions as a panel. Not every panelist will answer every question because that's really annoying to listen to. And then we're going to ask our 4 other invited guests to give a response to sort of what they have been thinking about this issue. And then we're going to turn it over to all of you for some more questions, perspectives, all of that. Sound good? Great. So I'm going to ask everyone to just do a quick introduction, just your name and your title. No thoughts at all yet, please. If you want to start, Brandy. Sure. And you just turn it on, yeah.
Sounds like I'm on. My name is Brandy Starr, and my title in this arena is Chair of the Brattleboro Select Board.
I'm Mike Fitzgerald, Brattleboro Police Chief.
I'm Tracy Shriver, Windham County State's Attorney. That means I'm your county prosecutor.
And you're going to keep that mic. So I'm going to do a little mic communication for a second. So there's one mic that's going to travel over here, one mic that's going to travel over here. I have a third mic that's going to travel over there. We just talked about a virus that people are really, really concerned about, and I'm going to ask everyone to put their mouth really, really close to the mic or it doesn't work. So that's comfortable.
Thank you for calling that out.
And it's a shortage of masks, I've heard. Indeed.
Excellent. Hope you all. Okay. Hi, I'm Samia Abbas, and I'm here today representing the Brattleboro Community Justice Center. I'm also a community member here in Brattleboro.
I'm Becca Ballant. I'm one of your 2 senators for Windham County, and I live here in Brattleboro on South Main Street.
I'm Tristan Tolino and one of the representatives to the Vermont House for Brattleboro with Molly, who's in the audience, and Emily, who's facilitating.
Oh, I am very caught up in this wire here. Here you go, Liz.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth McLaughlin. I'm the clerk of the Brattleboro Select Board.
I'm Daniel Quip. I'm a Brattleboro Select Board member.
Molly Burke, State Representative from Brattleboro District 2.
I'm Dave Scholes. I've been on the Select Board for 7 years.
You all can hold on to that for a little while. And Nader Hashim, a representative from Putney, Westminster, and Dummerston, who is on the House Judiciary Committee, wanted to be here today, and Senator Jeanette White, who is on the Senate Judiciary Committee, wanted to be here today. We did not realize until a few days ago that the Westminster Town Meeting is also today. And so the 2 of them are over there, but sort of sent some of their perspectives through the rest of us that we'll be sharing. So to get started, I would love to hear about what is actually happening from your perspectives in the community right now around this issue of car break-ins. Maybe one of the 3 of you want to get started on that.
Thank you. From the law enforcement perspective on what is happening and what prompted this forum was approximately 2 months ago. We have seen an enormous uptick in the amount of vehicle larcenies or attempted larcenies. And along with that uptick came a very vocal groups, and that's plural, from several neighborhoods within Brattleboro that requested meetings with the town manager and myself. We've met with the local residents of those communities, and they were outraged, they were concerned for their safety, and they wanted to know what we were doing about these uptick of vehicles that are going into. The vehicles that are being entered are either, they're both. Some were force, some with no force. Sometimes items were taken, sometimes items were not taken. And what we found is, as we were doing our data and refocusing our resources to address this, was that if an individual went into a vehicle and rummaged through the vehicle and then left without causing any damage or without stealing anything, no crime was violated. And that seemed to be very, very frustrating to everybody, to the officers, to the individuals in their neighborhoods. So we basically took a step back and reevaluated how we were deploying our resources into these neighborhoods, ways that we could address this, even though there was no law where we could make an arrest, and reached out to various other agencies that were experiencing the same incidents, both across the river and down south. I mean, this area was hit very hard, this tri-state area, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Vermont. And if you've been reading the papers lately, you've seen that, Hinsdale, Northfield, Greenfield, Brattleboro, that whole triangle was hit pretty good. What our greatest concerns were, obviously, having citizens feel comfortable and safe in their home. And another one of our concerns were that sometimes out of incidents like these, frustrations are born, and people do things that they normally wouldn't do. Good law-abiding citizens do things that they normally wouldn't do, and that was out of frustration. And you're protecting your family. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and someone is literally 5 feet from your back door or front door going through your vehicle, and you're going to come out and you're going to confront that individual, and things could escalate, and not escalate in the way that is safe for everybody. So that was our really biggest concern right there, is that this situation is going to escalate and somebody is going to get hurt. So that's pretty much how we saw the situation and what brought us here today.
Regarding the uptick, do you have numbers, and I'm sorry I didn't ask you specifically about that before we got here, but about sort of what rates were before and where we are now?
Sure.
What an uptick means, I guess.
The same time frame, November 2018 to February 2019, we had 26 larcenies from the vehicle. In the most recent time frame, November 2019 to the end of February 2020, we had 133. So you can see that is a huge uptick, approximately 200%.
Thanks. Tracy, do you want to?
So, from my perspective, I just want to give you a broad overview. My office files anywhere from 1,600 to 2,000 cases a year, and we're on track. It's the same as last year. There's not this huge increase. So I wanted to pull the perspective out a little bit. Chief Fitzgerald has given us a very particular snapshot of this particular crime. But I want everyone in this room to know that if you decided to look at any particular crime at any particular point, you would find an uptick. So for example, if you were to look at January as compared to September, the increase in domestic violence would alarm you. So I want to focus on what the problem is and not just numbers, because you could find numbers to support any kind of forum on any kind of crime. And the reason I am here is because I hope we have more forums like this on more types of crime, because it affects all of us. I'm sure there are plenty of people in this room who are affected by this particular crime, But the crimes that are going on in your community affect all of you. And we don't have forums like this to talk about all of it. And your input into the criminal justice system is extraordinarily important.
You want to add on that?
That's all right. That's what I get for turning it off on you earlier. I think on this particular question, it seems that the comments that we've heard seem sufficient, and I don't have much to add.
Samia, do you have anything to add? And I don't want to, do any of the three of you want to add anything at this point to what's currently happening now?
One of the reasons why I think Representative Kornheiser wanted me to sit on this particular panel is because I do represent Windham County, but I also live in Brattleboro. And my car has been broken into numerous times. I've had things stolen from my yard, and I also had my house broken into, and they bashed in the front door, and we were away in Burlington, my spouse and 2 kids, we were away in Burlington, and came back to find that the house had been ransacked, and they were clearly looking for quick turnaround for medication. All our medications were stolen. They were looking for cash. They were looking for easy things that could be sold, because the television was still there, some other things were still there. And I mention it because when you feel violated in that way, and you feel safe, that your safety's been challenged, and you, like, my first worry is my kids. How are my kids reacting to this? And kids are really resilient, we know that, but I can tell you that that deeply impacted my kids, who at that point were 7 and 10. And to find footprints in their bedrooms of the men who had gone through their rooms was devastating to them. So I wanted to bring that into the conversation because I feel like sometimes when we talk about these things, people who feel violated are sometimes accused of not being as compassionate to the people who have done the crime, who are oftentimes desperate, who are dealing, many of them, with addiction. But I just want to own both those things, that as a legislator, I'm trying to find solutions long-term to the problems of addiction in our community, to crime, but also I want to hold that feeling of it feels terrible. And as Chief Fitzgerald said, we want to feel safe in our community. So I wanted to bring that voice into the room and say, I know on a very real level what you're feeling, because my family has dealt with it too.
Be mic'd all the time. I feel like I can't breathe in front of y'all. So the next question I wanted to go through is why? Why is this happening right now, in this moment, in our community? And try to cover that before we talk about solutions, because I think it's really important to understand why something's happening in order to take the next step. And wondering who would like to start. Any whys down here? Okay. I think you turned it on.
Hello. Okay. I just a very brief background. So I'm a board member on the Brattleboro Community Justice Center Citizen Advisory Board. I also run the reparative program up in Bellows Falls, Vermont. So that is a program where folks who have committed misdemeanors of certain types come and work with a team of volunteers to make amends for their crimes that they've committed. Bellows Falls is obviously different from Brattleboro in several ways, but one thing that the restorative justice perspective sort of adds to this conversation is thinking about the sort of complex web of factors in which crime takes place in our communities, and seeking to address some of those underlying things with the idea that folks whose basic needs are not being met are going to have a hard time making positive connections to community. So that is one perspective that I hope we can sort of consider and keep considering as we talk about this as a community. Additionally, and sort of echoing what Becca was saying, it's so important to hold the needs of folks who have been victimized And that's another thing that restorative work really tries to do, is ask the question, how have you been harmed in these situations? And what do you need in order to feel safe again? So I just, so again, echoing what Becca is saying, sort of holding those different sort of spaces as we consider some of the root causes of what might be causing this.
I don't have any particular data around root cause, but I think definitely holding the tension both of what it feels like and also what is going on for people. My concern has been all along that when we feel vulnerable, if we respond purely through punitive measures, we lose sight of the complexity of what's really happening for people, and that we lose the permission in a certain way for our investments in trying to turn around the root causes. And so, while my presumption is that addiction, poverty, despair are key drivers of this particular pattern, my response is that we need to both work to understand how we feel safe and supported in our community lives together, and also acknowledge that to change those patterns requires long-term thinking, and it's hard to think long-term when your car's been ransacked, your windows have been smashed, that your personal space has been violated in some way, and that to me is the challenge before us as a community, is how to do both of those things simultaneously, to hold to that long view of what is going on for people, that the desperation is such that they're willing to sort of step into criminal activity or outside of norms of living in community together.
Thanks.
I would echo a lot of that, and I look at if we say what's happening right now, and I take that really literally, if I choose to make that decision, I look at my own circle of friends and family, and in the last 6 to 8 weeks, we've had 3 untimely deaths, and we all know that that's a really glossy way of saying 3 people in my intimate circle chose to leave this planet in ways that were unexpected. I've had a few people who have gone through divorces, and I've got people who are suffering from depression in my own inner circle, and that's a group of people who have supports. That's a group of people that can call their parents if they're falling behind on rent, or can reach out to friends or family, or can set up a meal train on Facebook and people actually respond to it. That's a group of people that has some insulation. And so if I take that same metric of what my life has looked like, or my intimate circle's life has looked like, and I apply it to a group of people that don't have that insulation, and then I respond to the question of what's going on right now, I guess I say, things are really crappy right now for a lot of people. Things are hard, it's freezing cold, people are depressed, people are in poverty, people are sleeping on the streets, and people are suffering from addictions that ravage their bodies and their minds, and they're responding in a way that you respond when your body and your mind is hurt and broken and screaming at you every day. And do I take that and say, that means they have the right to go into your stuff and make you feel violated? No. But I also say that the more that we keep saying, well, this is wrong, and this is black and white, and this is how it should be, and they did wrong, and I did right, the more this will continue, I promise. And it will probably exacerbate as people are continually more and more in poverty. Healthcare systems are breaking down, mental health systems. Things are not getting easier. And so the more that we push people away who are suffering the most, the more this will continue. And so how at this point can we recognize both sides, like Tristan said, and work harder to try to bridge gaps within our community so it does not continue to exacerbate the us versus them narrative?
I agree with a lot of I heard up here, but I am a big proponent of accountability. okay? People need to be held accountable for their actions. Why they did it certainly needs to be taken under consideration, but they absolutely need to be held accountable for their actions. And I guess the question is, what does that accountability look like? If people equate law enforcement accountability to a person that breaks the law, they immediately think that's probably incarceration or a jail, okay? That is a way of accountability. Not the way, but a way. There's many other ways you can hold people accountable for their actions. There's diversions, there's restorative justice, there's incarcerations, there's conditions, there's fines. There is a whole slew of different ways. And I think that's where the challenge lies, is what is going to be the best solution of holding that individual accountable for what they did, and then to get at the core of the issue to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that is a challenge. And I think some of the root causes here that we have experienced in a lot of our misdemeanor crimes is substance use disorder. I mean, that truly is at the core, in my opinion. And that is something that we have to address.
I was really cognizant that you said that this was sort of, there had been a spike in the tri-state area of this, that this wasn't a Brattleboro specific issue. And I'm wondering if either of you could say more about conversations you've had about that. If you've sort of, what that means for the why.
I don't know what it means for the why, but
Okay.
I'm gonna put a plug in for my officers. We pushed it out of Brattleboro. That's why it went to other areas. It got too hot. They didn't like it here. We changed our tactics. We dumped a whole lot of money in overtime with officers that were on their days off. We took a lot of support from local car dealerships that gave us unmarked cars that we were out there. We would make ourselves visible, really, really visible in one neighborhood, and then be completely invisible in another neighborhood at the same time. So as we pushed them from one neighborhood to one where they're like, cops are crawling all over the place, let's go cross town to this area, we were in the bushes waiting for them. And then when it got too hot, they went over to Hinsdale. And then our officers went over to Hinsdale to help Hinsdale. And then from there, they went down towards Northfield, down south of Vernon. And we also have collaborated with the Northfield Police Department. And it was the same individuals. So I'm gonna give a shout out to all the hard work of our officers on responding to the needs of the community and everything that I have asked for admirably.
Do you have anything to add?
I don't.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next question I want to focus on is jurisdiction, and I brought this in because this is a really small state, and one of the reasons I ran for office was because being a representative seemed like a real normal thing to do, because I could talk to my own representatives. And so I think because we all sort of see each other in the grocery store or walking down the street, whether that's our select board members or our prosecutor or our elected representatives, I think it's really easy to feel like any of those people can solve any of the problems. And so I wanted to bring some perspective to this, because as I was getting a lot of email on this issue, I wanted to help people tomorrow. And sometimes, we can help people tomorrow make government sort of work better, clear out lines of communication when an individual can't do that very well. But most of the time in the legislature, we're working on like a 5-year timeline. And so wanted to sort of really give everyone a chance to say like what their lane is and what it looks like when they're sort of expanding slightly out of their lane, so that when we move into solutions, we can think about sort of whose responsibility those solutions will be and how we can cooperate across them. Does that make sense? So let's start with the Senate with regards to jurisdiction. Does that make sense?
Sure. So I know in the emails that many of us received, there were questions from many constituents. Why don't we have a law on the books that makes it a crime simply to enter another person's car, whether you take something or not? And of course, on the face of it, right, we have private property. We don't want people going through our stuff, right? And so what I want to have you think about is what it takes to get a new law passed, right? So you have to have a sponsoring legislator to take it to a committee in either the Senate or the House. And then they have to convince all the members of that committee, or at least a majority of the members of that committee, that this law is needed. And then it needs to go to the full Senate to get passed. You have to convince a majority of the members of the Senate to pass it, and then it gets sent to the House. And then the exact same thing has to happen on the House side. You have to get a majority of a committee in the House to believe that this is the right path, and then it has to go to the full House. And then if the bills don't align, you have to either send versions back and forth, or go to conference committee. And it could either pass out of conference committee, or it could fall apart in conference committee. Then they have to take it back to each of the chambers to approve what was done in conference committee. My point is to just highlight that democracy is long and it's messy. And oftentimes it works, but it's not quick. And so this past Friday was something that we call crossover day. And that is a critical date in the legislature where bills that we want passed in the Senate need to make it to the House in time for them to do all of those parts. So a bill introduced now is not going to have time to go through all of those stages of passage before it comes back out. And that's assuming that the bill itself will become law and that it would actually work to solve our problem. It may or may not. We haven't taken testimony, so I don't know what other states have done. But I wanted to sort of set that up. This is a very, very long process. Simultaneously, we as a state have decided that we want to incarcerate less people for many reasons. That it's incredibly expensive. We don't have enough prison beds, as they say, in Vermont to house the folks who are in corrections. We have to send some of our folks out of state, which is also, it's hard on those families that have people sent out of state. They can't visit them. We as a state have decided that this is important to keep people in Vermont who are from Vermont when they are serving their time. In order for us to live those values of ending what we call mass incarceration for often nonviolent crimes, we have to make a commitment that we're not going to actually sentence people to serve time for a crime like entering into someone's car. Now, as I said, that's a commitment that the legislature has made in conjunction with the administration, the governor's office, that this is something that we as Vermonters want, to incarcerate less people. So it is highly unlikely at this point in the legislature that a bill of this nature would make it through the Judiciary Committee on the Senate side, let alone make it to the House. That doesn't mean that there might not be other things that we as a legislative delegation can do. But I just wanted to ground us in the reality of the process because it's incredibly long. And I'm sure Tristan, from the House perspective, will have things to say about that. But I will also say that, as I said, I'm here as a community member. And as I walk my dog and my kids around my neighborhood, I hear from a lot of residents who are feeling pretty desperate and they don't feel safe. And so that resonates with me as not just your elected official, but as someone who lives here in town. And so I'm here to literally hear from my constituents, what are other ideas that we have?
Yes, a couple things. I think we have one more week before crossover.
Well,
on our side.
Yeah, they're slackers over there.
We have a lot of people. So anyway, I think one of the reasons why we were hoping that Nodder would be here is that Nodder did introduce what's called a short form bill. It's H923, and it speaks specifically to this issue of the gap in the law, and that goes to the jurisdictional question I think that Emily offered as for this section of the conversation, which is that for us in the legislature, even though we're very rooted, I think, in our home communities, our view is the larger, the macro, both the long term around the policy supports to, how do we turn the curve on substance use disorder? How do we broaden the reach of state government and state resources through all the different components of our criminal justice system, our support networks for restorative justice, all of these facets of how the state supports and funds the richness of a community response to really complex social problems. But specifically on the bill side, there is a vehicle to have a conversation about this particular gap in the law. And the reason I was saying I think we have another week is that I think some language from that is going to be included in a House bill that will get to the Senate Judiciary within a window where they may or may not have time to do all the work that they want to do on it. We'll see, but there will be at least the possibility of our bodies doing something this year. And again, it's always hard to know because there are so many different layers to the work of the committees, whether it will in fact get there. And I will just sort of parenthetically add that I think it's important that law enforcement and the community perspectives inform our view at the statewide level. And we are moving away from prison as a solution wherever possible. We are, I think, I like to think of it as trying to sort of supersize restorative justice. I don't know that we've actually gotten quite there yet. But there is a limit even with this bill. Like even if it became law this year, simply making it a crime isn't necessarily going to address the root causes, and it may or may not be prosecuted, but it gives law enforcement at least a way of acknowledging to people that violation of their space is considered to be a criminal act. Or a misdemeanor of something that experience of violation is actually recognized by the state. And so I think that's crucial at our level of work, whether we can get it all the way to the finish line this year or whether we finish it the next biennium. At least we are trying to respond to that experience that people are having with making sure that the law reflects that.
I just want to add one other thing, which Tristan alluded to, but I just want to make explicit that we represent our communities in our two bodies, and the experiences of someone living in Woodstock and someone living in Woodford and someone living in Brandon may be very different from the experience that we're having here in Brattleboro. So that's the challenge that we have, is to make it relevant to folks in other communities.
Samia, I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to try to go from sort of the the hierarchy on down in terms of jurisdiction.
Right, so the question is jurisdiction. Chief Fitzgerald and I live in the middle. We are bound by rules and decisions that are not made by us. We take the laws that the legislature enacts for you, and we enforce them through arrest, citation, and prosecution. What we get out of arrest, prosecution, is then interpreted by the judges who serve in our communities. Chief Fitzgerald and I get very little discretion within that. We are told by our legislature that certain crimes, a majority of crimes, are worth no more than $200 bail maximum. So when Chief Fitzgerald's law enforcement officers make an arrest and they call my office and say, should we ask for bail? We can interpret that law, but then it's the judge who makes the ultimate decision. And a judge who's told most crimes are worth $200 bail, well, that's a maximum amount. So what you need to understand and what you need to hear from your legislators who are here is that they represent your community. And if those changes in the law are not something you can live with, then we all need to speak up. That's why I started my comments with, I wish we had more community forums like this. We need to know what changes in the law are happening in criminal justice and other laws. I'm totally biased in favor of what laws are happening for criminal justice, obviously. But it's important that this community's values are reflected in what's going on in Montpelier. And I encourage you, if you have questions, if your car was broken into and you want to know why that person was cited and released, I hear that a lot. Cite and release, what the heck is that? Ask those questions today.
Law enforcement's role is, well, pretty simply is to enforce the laws. As stated earlier, we don't make the laws, we just simply what is enforced on the books. And some fights are worth fighting for, and I hope that this bill is fought for, because I believe that you have an expectation of privacy in your vehicle. You have an expectation of privacy for your house, for your garage, for your shed. Why wouldn't that be extended to your vehicle that's in your driveway? I think the courts recognize that you have an expectation of privacy to your vehicle simply by, I need a warrant to go in your vehicle. If that wasn't the case, I wouldn't need a warrant. But I need a warrant to go into your vehicle because you have an expectation of privacy of that vehicle. So, I hope this bill does pass, because it would help us, our officers, when we're out there and dealing with it. And not to arrest somebody or incarcerate them or anything like that. If we want to get at the core, then we have to get the defendant into the system. And a lot of people will balk and be taken aback by saying you're using law enforcement to get people into the system. Yup, that's probably not your first choice, and it's probably not your best choice. But it is a choice that we deal with every single day on the front lines with a lot of these misdemeanor crimes. And why not utilize that? It goes back to what I said earlier. We're out there. We see these individuals. Long before we made an arrest, we knew who was doing these break-ins. Long before we were able to make an arrest. You knew who was doing these long before we were making the arrest, because you were giving me the same names my officers were. But as the state's attorney stated, there's procedures, there's rules that we have to follow. And it's a good system, but everybody needs to be informed on how the system works and who has what authority within what part of their system. Or like I tell my officers, stay in your lane, okay? Our officers shouldn't be explaining to you why this isn't a law. They shouldn't be explaining to you why the judge released this individual on conditions or things of that nature, okay? Those are what those components of the judicial systems do. If you have questions on how we enforce a law, if you have any questions on how we investigate or tactics, then you would talk to a law enforcement officer. Prosecution, you obviously would talk to the state's attorneys. How does a bill become a law? You would talk to your legislatures. What laws do you want? You would talk to your legislatures. So it's a good system, but it can be confusing and sometimes hard to navigate. But it works well together, and that's why I'm hoping that this bill does become a law, simply because it would help us get at the core sooner. Are we going to wait till this individual escalates and commits a more serious violation before we get involved, where we could have got involved months ago, when we're just seeing the early signs of, why are you out here at 2 o'clock in the morning stealing 60 cents? Are we going to wait till they break into a house? I hope not. I want to get involved early. We're doing them a disservice by not getting involved early. We're doing the community a disservice by not getting involved early. And that's where I hope we get out of this.
The role of the Brattleboro Select Board is really to enforce what is set forth in our town charter, what is on the books for ordinances, take a look at some of the ordinances. Some of those ordinances have been on the books for 100 years, and there's been laws passed nationally and statewide that rule them to be anywhere from superfluous to literally against federal law. And so we're looking at ordinances, we work with the town manager, but really the Brattleboro Select Board does not set laws. We do not set law enforcement policy. While we might say this is the kind of policing that we would like to support, Chief Fitzgerald runs a very compassionate and accountability-focused police department, which is exactly why I would trust that to be an entry point into our system as it is because I know it's being done in a way that, like you said, you'd rather step in when somebody's out there stealing 60 cents at 2 a.m. That's a very holistic way to look at something. I trust a department to be an entry point when I hear that. But the Brattleboro Select Board does not create laws. They do not alter laws. They do not make laws.
We don't have anyone from the federal level that's here, but I just sort of want to put that piece into the conversation as well, that the majority of our economy is shaped by federal and even international forces. And I would say that's also true for drug policy and addiction issues, that the majority of the money that we have to tackle any given problem, as well as sort of the big forces that shape those problems, really happens at the federal level. The state has so few revenue options compared to the federal level that, so much of what's happening in Brattleboro is just sort of happening all across the country right now. And maybe happened all across the country 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 6 years ago or even 8 years ago. And Vermont actually is often sort of slow to catch up on national trends for better and worse. But just sort of want to name that a lot of what we're dealing with here are much larger issues that are really within federal jurisdiction as much as we're going to do what we can at the state and local level to do something about them. And I'm wondering if you could talk about your role, your jurisdiction at the Justice Center, and really then pivot to solutions, because I think they're sort of part and parcel of what you all do there.
Yeah, so on the role of the Justice Centers in this area, and Brattleboro Justice Center specifically, kind of fall in a few different ways. On the one hand, sort of down the line, there's the receiving of referrals from folks like the State's Attorney's Office, the Police Department, and that is sort of the response to crimes themselves, and how do we sort of use a restorative approach to take into account these like underlying causes and also the needs of victims and things like that. But another thing that I think is very true about the jurisdiction of the Justice Centers is figuring out and designing processes that have to do with what community accountability looks like. And that is, can look like a lot of different things, but in sort of a longer term view, it's how do we prevent violence and promote community safety from the grassroots. And so that is something that I'm really interested in hearing from folks about here, because that is a participatory process. That's the question of like, how do we participate in community every day? And that's something that the Justice Centers are sort of here to support. And can I move towards solutions? So one initiative that happened through the Brattleboro Justice Center in the last year or so was partnering with the co-op and the police department, the State's Attorney's Office, so taking sort of this like collaborative approach to deal with crimes that were happening at the co-op repeatedly. The co-op was really victimized by a lot of different types of thefts, and so they created a list of crimes that were commonly happening there, and then worked with the Justice Center to send folks who were committing those crimes to the Justice Center for a restorative process. So that's an example of like a really collaborative effort that had sort of immediate results and was able to be implemented because of the collaboration of folks in this room and the community at large, the co-op being like sort of a community space, as well as a business. And so I would love to spend more time sort of echoing Tracy, like more of these sorts of forums to figure out what that process could look like, and really honing in on it. And as a community member, I would challenge us to take into account like all these different underlying sources of crime and design processes that are equitable and just and inclusive as well. So I just want to give voice to that.
I just want to tell a story before we sort of pivot over to this other side of the room. I've lived in a whole bunch of different neighborhoods in Brattleboro and a few other places around the country, and I lived in Burlington for a short period of time about 8 years ago. And Burlington, in a lot of ways, has a lot of the same experiences of Brattleboro, but they've sort of the impacts of the opiate epidemic and some quality of life crimes, such as this one, sort of have happened a lot more and a lot more regularly up there than they do here, because it's a larger city. I don't know if it would be considered a city anywhere else in the country, but it is a city here in Vermont. And when I lived there, a whole variety of different petty crimes happen as sort of part of the course of regular life, because it's a city. But one thing that happened is while my family was, so my son was sleeping, and I was in my bedroom, and my roommate, who is sort of well on the other side of the house, was in his bedroom. And so I heard someone outside my door, and I thought it was my roommate getting home, sort of like waiting outside my door to hear if I was awake to start, to just like have a conversation, how people do. And I said, hello, hello, and then I came out, and I smelled cologne in my dining room, which was not my roommate's cologne. And I realized that someone had come into our house and had just been there for a really brief time, but they'd gone into my son's room while he was sleeping and taken just like a bowl of like rolled coins. You know how children like think that's actually fun to do, is roll coins for like an incredibly long period of time, that he was incredibly proud of. And his Discman, which like even at that point was like a very outdated technology, and this glass. It was actually a glass urinal that I had gotten at Experienced Goods, but it was really pretty. You didn't really know it was a urinal. And we would put spare change in it. And for like whatever reason, I was like very attached to this strange antique medical art object. And those were the only 3 things that had been taken from the house. And then my roommate sort of heard me storming around. He came running out. He realized what had happened. He like took off in his bathrobe with a baseball bat into the street, which like what was going to happen from there? Nothing good. Right? And eventually came back, and I just, felt incredibly violated. My son felt so violated for a long period of time. And it was really hard. And then one day, about a month later, someone on Front Porch Forum in Burlington was giving away an antique glass urinal. And it was not my antique glass urinal. I'd actually found the shards of my glass urinal in the, my neighbor's yard the next day. And so I know it's a ridiculous story, but it's going to circle back in a second. And so I got this from my neighbor and had a long conversation with him about how meaningful it was to me to get this ridiculous object from a neighbor. And that it was in that moment that we actually started to heal from this violation. That there had been a whole pile of different problems and different challenges around it. But I realized that we didn't start to sort of come out the other side of it as a family until I'd had that experience with sort of this third neighbor who brought some closure for me. And so just want to name that how much we're really all in this together as we navigate it. We are now on solutions.
I'm going to try to stop thinking about the urinal. So I agree with Chief Fitzgerald that the criminal justice system works. If you've heard me speak, you've probably heard me say that it's a little out of date, it's a little clunky, it's a little old-fashioned. I agree with a lot of criminal justice reforms that are going on. But I want to tell you something that the first-year law student learns about the criminal justice system. There are certain outcomes, right, that we expect from the criminal justice system. One is we want to incapacitate criminals. I have been prosecuting people in your county for over 20 years. And if I sat here for maybe 5 minutes, I could come up with a list with probably less than 10 people who need to be incapacitated, right? We don't have criminals like that here. Thank goodness. Another goal of the criminal justice system, sentencing, is punishment, obviously, and we can talk more about that. Another goal is deterrence. We want to specifically deter the person who did the crime from doing it again, and we want to send a message to the community, you shouldn't do this or this will happen to you. And the final goal is rehabilitation. I am going to guess that every single person in this room would like that to be a 100% successful goal of the criminal justice system, right? Because if we rehabilitate someone, they are not going to recidivate, they're not going to do a crime again, they're going to be productive members of the society. So how do we focus on rehabilitation? And that's a really complicated question. And we're trying to do lots of different things. As Samia says, we're involving community justice, we're involving youth services and diversion. We're coming up with all sorts of solutions that are outside the norms of the criminal justice system. But when we talk as a community about what we would like to see happen, I'd like you to think about those traditional goals of criminal justice, right? Incapacitation, punishment, deterrence, and rehabilitation.
No solutions for you? Do you have any, Brandy? Solutions? I can tell another story about random artifacts from my house.
Nobody saw that story coming from. I think that's fine. I don't mind deferring my comments because I don't necessarily at this time have solutions. If I did, I like to get in there and do stuff, and I would have already fixed it all with a magic snap.
So I'm encouraged by some of the advanced work that Tristan has done in judiciary on the House side. We were just talking offline over here. So I hear what the chief is saying. I hear what Tracy Schreiber is saying. And so it's possible that the bill that's been introduced by Representative Hashim is not going to be able to, oh, Senator White, excellent, who sits on judiciary on the Senate side. We are tag teaming this morning. She was in Westminster. I'm about to leave to go to Westminster. But I want to say it's possible that the language, some of the language from the bill that Representative Hashim introduced might be able to come to the Senate attached to another bill that's moving. And that would be a way to kind of fast track it. So I'm committed to talking to Tristan about this, and Senator White can also talk to this later as we bring her up to speed about what we've been talking about. So I apologize that I need to go, but her arriving here means I need to go to Westminster. But I am the only ballant in the phone book in Vermont. I'm also, there is a link to my email online at the Vermont Legislative homepage, and I hope people who have been at this forum who have more to say about what we can do in the legislature will feel free to contact us.
One more solution I want to talk about that's been sort of touched on, but I want to make explicit, is we have sort of the solutions to, we've been talking a lot about the short-term solutions to things, how we can pass this bill to sort of give more authority and flexibility to the police department and the prosecutors on this issue. We're also doing a lot of work in this community and some really cutting edge work in this community around sort of the wider pieces of prevention, what it means to bring people more fully into the economy so that they can make it work, and what prevention and treatment around substance use issues looks like. And those are long-term, big conversations to really have this community be one where everyone can thrive. But that work is happening as well, and I want to make sure we don't lose track of it, because that's so much of the root causes we talked about, but not the solutions that we've sort of brought in yet. So we need to focus on sort of both the big picture, long-term solutions to these issues, as well as the short-term, what can we do about the crimes that are happening in our communities today. And now we are going to go along with our invited guests to share your thoughts on any of the questions that have come up today. If you want to start, David.
This is all great. It's really good information. We're an hour into a public forum. We haven't heard from the public yet. So other than saying that there are people here that, despite all of this, are not being protected, they're in a position where they may have to feel like they have to protect themselves. Kids are resilient, but they're also easily damaged, and I would really like to hear from the public about their concerns. So,
I just want to say you can add my my car being broken into, to the list, to your list. I never actually even called it in, and nothing was taken. But I think this is a great conversation, and I'll be interested to see, in the process of listening to testimony about this bill, there's so many different facets of the situation that will come to light. And I also appreciate all the work that our police department and prosecutor are doing, and also the restorative justice piece. So I think that how do we gather all those things together is of interest to me.
Thanks. Whilst I'm really happy that so many people turned out, and I'm glad that we took the time to hear from all the perspectives of folks that are involved in the various lanes, and I'm really happy that the police department responded in such a nimble way to shift their tactics to make our communities safer. And I also hold that that doesn't address any of the root causes, right? We shifted the problem someplace else, and that's what it is. I definitely want to hear from folks that, my neighbors had their cars broken into. My neighbors had change taken from their vehicles. My neighbors' children felt unsafe. And at the select board level, I think one of the ways that we function is it's a place for you to go and tell people what's up, right? We might not be able to solve that problem, that day. And a lot of the work is about collaboration. So I think as a community, right, we can figure out some ways that we want these problems to be solved. I was kind of thinking about the 60 cents that somebody took from somebody's vehicle. As a community, what would we want to see happen to a person that took 60 cents from our vehicle is one thing. And then the other part of that is, what do we want to see happen in our communities when we don't feel safe, right? Because it's not about the 60 cents. I had trouble sleeping at night during this time because my vehicle's sitting outside my bedroom, my neighbor's been broken into, my other neighbor's been broken into. I'm wondering, when am I going to hear my window smash in my car, and how am I going to handle that, right? It's not really about the money. So, probably what some of you heard is a lot of equivocating and yes, but, and no, but that's just what it is, right? There isn't this magic solution that's sitting there. So I'm going to be quiet and I'll look at my questions.
Thank you, Daniel. My concern for my fellow residents and myself in Brattleboro, in our homes, to feel safe. One national statistic, as Emily was bringing up, is that 40% of the American public doesn't have $400 in reserve for an emergency. And to me, that means that people in their homes, that adds to everyone's insecurity and the feeling of helplessness. And what we can all do to help that, and what I was pleased to hear when Chief Fitzgerald came to the select board to discuss this, was that everyone needs to work with the police department to inform the police department of every incident so that they can use that data, they can track that data, and they have successfully brought those statistics down because of everyone's input. I mean, people feeling helpless should know that working with the police department is in itself a solution. And I know there has been an arrest. I saw that maybe the other day. I don't know, Chief, if you would like to speak to, one, the arrest, and two, what you use people's information to and how that has allowed you to make arrests and reduce the frequency.
Yeah, the community's input has been critical. I mean, absolutely invaluable. The community's input has not only been critical, but totally invaluable in us gathering the data. As a matter of fact, we went back probably 3 or 4 weeks ago and readjusted how we did our data, simply because what we found out was, since there was no law when an individual went into your car and rummaged through, didn't do any damage, didn't take anything, and then left, we coded that off as suspicious circumstances because there was no law broken. And when I ran attempts for larceny in vehicles and larceny of vehicles, I looked and found more under suspicious circumstances. And so we sat back, our team sat back and said, okay, went in there, and now what we do is, regardless if anything was taken or not, I'm coding that off as an attempted larceny. If someone goes into your vehicle and rummages through, doesn't take anything, doesn't do any damage, and you call the police, I'm coding that off as an attempted larceny, simply because a reasonable person would believe the only reason anything wasn't taken is because they didn't find anything of value.
And does that help you sort of figure out where resources should go in the community and find patterns so you can put officers out in certain neighborhoods and track all that? Okay,
Absolutely.
great, thank you.
And the reason I bring that up is because we want you to call us when nothing was taken, okay? Because that doesn't negate the fact that an individual is out there attempting to do that. And I know the numbers are higher because just like Representative Burke said, she didn't call simply because nothing was taken. That's understandable. A lot of people do that, or it's just there was some change, or it was a DVD that I didn't listen to anyway, or a Leatherman, or just things that you would think are just insignificant. I'm telling you, there is no insignificant amount that was taken. We want to know about the incident, and that way we can sit back and look and say, okay, in this neighborhood, and we run stats for absolutely everything. Weather. I mean, we look at weather and patterns. We look at the time of day, the time of night, the day. It's funny. We have arrested people that have had Wednesday, Thursdays off because they worked nights at a certain company. So all of a sudden it's like, why is this certain neighborhood only hit on Wednesdays and Thursdays? And then when we made the arrest, we found out why. Because Friday through Tuesday they were at work. It's just, so every bit of data goes into that, and we sit back and analyze that.
Thank you. So our Rep. Hashim has arrived from Westminster Town Meeting, and Senator White is here, and I'm going to give them each a minute to sort of just like really 2 minutes about how you see this issue, both root causes and solutions that you're looking at. And then we're going to hear from all of you. While they're speaking, I'm going to walk around and collect, if you want to pass up questions to me that you want me to say out loud rather than you saying out loud, that's your opportunity, and feel free to hold on to your question if you want to be the one who asks it. So, Senator White, take it away.
Thanks. And so I think I'm talking to you instead of them. But we do take this very seriously, and I think personally I do, and as a member of the Judiciary Committee do, and I think that the question that Daniel asked is, what do we want to do with the person who steals 60 cents? Are they a criminal, or are there other root causes that we need to look at? And so that's all I'm going to say, because I want to hear from you guys. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late. I was up in Westminster. So I'm Representative Hashim. I serve on the Judiciary Committee, and probably about a month ago, I submitted a piece of legislation which Chief Fitzgerald came up to testify on. And so as you've heard, right now in Vermont, you can enter another person's vehicle, not take anything or break anything, and it's not a crime. And I first want to say that I am very supportive of harm reduction, pretrial diversion, and things that keep people out of jail. which is why the piece of legislation, as it stands now, does not have any jail time associated with it. However, I do believe that people have an expectation of privacy for their vehicles. And, you know, like I said, I support these other programs, but if I were to go out to my truck right now and somebody was rummaging through my belongings, I'd be very upset. And so there's also the other element that, you know, we want to see these harm reduction programs, but we also need to make sure that there is support from the public. And I believe that if the public does not feel that their own property is protected or that they don't feel safe, I don't believe that we're going to see support for harm reduction programs as well. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be sticking around for a while.
I wonder if you want to go, if you and Senator White want to go have some chairs up at the front, and I will be passing around the microphone. You can hold on to that one, Senator. Who would like to go first? Great.
Hi, I'm Vicki Shepherd. I live in West Pratt.
You really have to talk right into the germ mic.
Okay. Hi, I'm Vicki Shepherd. I live in West Pratt. My car's been broken into and it's been attempted to break in. We could tell by the footprints in the snow. After I realized that, I have a walker-friendly neighborhood, people walking dogs, a preschool across the street. There are a lot of people there. I told everybody. I told my immediate neighbors. I told my dog walking friends. I found out that there had been a break-in, several break-ins, a few days before. No one told me. So I want to ask about communication. I put it on Facebook. I put it on Front Porch Forum twice. What do you have in place to let us know? I would have made sure my car was locked.
Thanks. Does anyone up here want to take that question? Communication systems around patterns. I do think Front Porch Forum, which some communities use a lot more dynamically than we tend to in Brattleboro, is a great tool, as is Facebook, as is actually going and talking to your neighbors in person. And then I think as elected representatives, we have, and appointed, are you appointed? Is that your, okay. We also have a responsibility to figure out communication systems so that you know how to be safe in your homes. Anyone want to add anything to that?
The Brattleboro Police Department does usually put out something on the Facebook page, and select board members often share it out. I've definitely seen things flying around, but really outside of social media and what you're already seeing in, you know, the roundup in the newspaper, there's not a whole lot of ways that communities communicate, is there? We don't have like community meetings every Friday night or something, so it's mostly the newspaper or social media or knocking on doors, which some of us are reluctant to do, but obviously some of us are brave enough to do.
Do you want to?
We do a monthly report for the select board. That pretty much highlights some of our major cases and things of that nature. I am currently reviewing other different types of reports that we could put out. I agree with you. There should be some way that we can get out more information. And I've also consulted with the town manager, or let's be honest, he consulted me on how we want to be more robust in getting out information like that. And we are currently exploring the different types of reports that we can run that we will put on our website, to where you can to go and look to see that even though an arrest wasn't made, you might be able to see trends like, you know, these attempts in certain neighborhoods and things of that nature. So that is a pretty high priority, so you'll probably see that in the next several weeks on the different reports. Because like right now, I just publish arrests in my report, and it needs to be more robust and in-depth. I agree.
Thank you. So towards that same topic, I have a question on a piece of paper here that on the Brattleboro Facebook page, people have mentioned criminals putting dog leashes on doors to mark a house, and perhaps other ways of marking a house. Is that true? And also, if it's not true, how do we address the misinformation that tends to fly around on social media? I know that for me as a representative, when I see misinformation on social media, sometimes I try to jump in and correct it, sometimes I don't. And I think that might be true for all of us. And there's no way that we can ask the chief or say our town manager to be like constantly trolling through Facebook to be piping back up with everything that's going on. So one, is that true about the leashes? And two, what do we do about misinformation? Much bigger question.
That's the first I've heard of it, so I don't know if it's true or not. Social media, I'm not a big fan of at all. Zero. If you have a question, call the police department. Don't go on social media and look, and you have no idea who, Cookie Time 24 is. But yet you're accepting what they're having to say is gospel. To me, that just defies any type of logic. If you have a question dealing with safety of a neighborhood, crime, advice on what you can do to minimize yourself being a victim of crime, please call the police department. And we're one of the few professions that still make house calls. So if you can't come to us, we'll come to you. It's not a problem at all. And we do quite a bit. We absolutely do quite a bit. So that'd be my advice. You read something on social media that you have questions about, then I would go to a trusted source.
Thank you. And towards that end of trusted sources and how to get the word out, I'm in charge of the question mic there, Senator. Thank you, though. Tracy touched on this. We are all accessible. So if you have a question about something that her office is doing, call the office. If you have something about your elected representatives in the House or Senate, you can call the State House, you can send us an email. We're all very accessible all the time. If you call the State House and leave a message, an 8th grader in a little green jacket will bring us a note within 10 minutes that has your phone message on it. So it's a real thing. It's not like it goes to some random assistant into a void. There's an 8th grader in a green jacket that brings a piece of paper. And that's true come visit too, so you can understand what I'm talking about the 8th grader in the green jacket. And that's true, your select board is totally responsive. So if you have a question about something that's going on in your community, just ask the person who would know the answer, because we're right here and right there ready to answer those questions. Nader, yes.
I just wanted to throw in something regarding this idea of casing houses or marking houses. Back in the trooper days, it was actually pretty common for folks to, in the rural areas, go to other people's houses, open up gates, or open up screen doors, things that are kind of innocuous and seem, not out of the ordinary. And then they would drive back around to see when that gate would be closed, because the homeowner would come back and say, oh, no, let me close that gate. So if you notice these little things that are, if you're positive you didn't leave a gate open or something, just make a note in your mind. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks.
I just wanted to speak to the social media part. So I'm 41, so I remember a time before the internet, and I also grew up, with the internet. And I think on social media, we treat that as our public square these days, right? So I love living in a town this size. I'm not from here, you can probably tell. And I grew up in a large town, then moved to big cities, then came here. My wife's from Newfane, which is even smaller. But the difference between Brattleboro and Newfane is that we actually have a main street with people on it, and you talk to each other every day. So Vicky, who was talking about talking with her neighbors, that's absolutely the answer in some ways to solving some of these problems, right? If we have communities where we feel like we know each other and we've got each other's back, and we're talking to each other about what's going on, not just the bad stuff, right? Also the good stuff, and the invites over to a party and whatnot, that's really helpful. But like social media does serve that purpose for a lot of people as well. And we shouldn't just kind of totally, belittle it and say that don't trust anything you see on there, because there's a lot of information on there. Like this event was posted on social media, and I'm sure some of you came because you saw it, right? So we need to find a good balance. And how do we find good information on there? And who do we know, is putting out credible stuff? It's a challenge for our time, I think, that's one of our big issues. But I would encourage you to talk to your neighbors. And I know that some of the folks in the kind of Moreland Ave, Marlboro Ave, have been hit really hard by this. And I know that they organized in their community to kind of get folks to come to a select board meeting. And more of that, is really helpful.
I'm going to say my piece and then apologize because I have to leave for an appointment. So my name is Richard Moore. I live on Marlboro Avenue. Thank you for chasing those people out of our neighborhood. We appreciate that. And I want to echo something the chief said earlier, and that's that I believe that compassion and accountability can and should coexist. Starting in 1990, for 17 years, I was a housing coordinator at Morningside Shelter here in Brattleboro, and then for the next 13 years, the co-director of a program in Springfield, Vermont that housed homeless people and gave them support services very successfully. And I am absolutely convinced that a primary reason for our success is that we had reasonable expectations of people in terms of their behavior, clearly stated rules, consequences for violating those rules, and we enforced them across the board. And so, I worked with a lot of people who had a long history of not obeying rules who did, for the simple reason they knew that if they did not, the consequences were coming. So I think you do a disservice to people by not holding them accountable. You kind of enable that kind of behavior. And I just want to say that, I've been in town over 30 years, and in my opinion, there's a much more hardened criminal element in town now than there used to be in the old days. I think, speaking for myself, I'm often horrified when you see these stories in the paper of people who've committed a terrible crime, often destroying other people's lives, and it's their 8th felony. And so, my main complaint, I guess, is about sentencing. Or the whole released on conditions thing, where people, they're released, it's their 57th violation of their conditions. I mean, why would they give any credence to those conditions when there's never a consequence? So, I think, I wouldn't want to see people in jail for stealing 60 cents, but for aggravated domestic assault, absolutely. For other violent crimes, absolutely, because I think there the purpose of jail is to protect the innocent. Thank you.
Hi, I live on Pine Street, and in my neighborhood, I actually lived in cities before, and so I've always locked my doors. We don't leave things that are of value out. However, I do see activity, and I have seen the footprints in the snow, and things have been gone through in my garage. And I've called, and I've tried to follow this expectation of even if something wasn't taken, that you should call. And the response that I've had has been mixed. And sometimes the dispatcher takes what I say seriously and seems interested, and then other times that's not true. I often don't have a lot of follow-up. And then when I do, sometimes the onus is put back on me. And so I'm not the type of person to be discouraged and stop calling you, because I care about this community and I want things to be fixed. But I could see for other people experiencing the same thing that I experienced, that they might stop calling. And so as a favor, I would like to ask maybe there be a little bit more training with the dispatchers of not sounding like, well, how do you know something happened? That's the tone I've had before. And I know, because I know that we didn't come from the street and walk around our cars and then walk to the next driveway. Or I know that it's drug activity that's happening down the street, because I see it all the time. So I'm trying to let you know, and I'm trying to do my part, and I need to feel like that's being appreciated more than I'm feeling. Thank you.
I have a
question on a piece of paper, which is about, I think it's about the idea of cars being, that going into an unlocked car is not breaking in. And the question is, what about the trespass issue? If someone is going to your car, they have to already trespass onto your property to get to your car.
I think Chief Fitzgerald has said this before. You're going to have to mark your property with no trespass signs for us to be able to arrest someone.
Brattleboro, the one and only, no trespassing.
Right. We could try to do it townwide. I'm somehow thinking judges are not going to help me out there when I prosecute that. But yes, if you have a sign up, then the police are going to be able to arrest that person for just trespassing.
In response to, and kind of piggybacking off of what you just said around consistency in response when being vulnerable and reporting something that has affected you, I think it's also important, and I know that you gave an example of restorative justice practices being utilized with the co-op and community members. And so my question is, are there opportunities, and if so, what are the opportunities for repair work on the level of the community, even when the person who is, quote unquote, doing the harm or setting the tone for the need for repair work to occur is never caught? And with that, how can we collaboratively work together in the light of community restorative justice practices and normalizing and gaining buy-in for those community restorative justice practices, even when there isn't like an entity that's being held accountable? And what are the effects of producing change in that light?
Thank you. That was the question I was trying to get at with my rambling urinal story, so I appreciate how much better you asked it.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's such a good question. And that's, I think, really where the piece of like creating ways for people to voice the harm that has been done to them is really important, and that can happen in a perfect circle restorative justice process. That happens in dialogue with the person who has offended. But the way that we practice restorative justice in a Western-based framework, and in the way that it's sort of come from the criminal justice system, is often incomplete, in the sense that in this case, like the person who has offended might actually not be part of that process. But we do, and what I'm hearing is like there is a lot of harm that is being done, and so finding ways to support community safety is something that can happen through like more sorts of like open dialogue with each other, sharing, collaborating, and that is, that needs to happen side by side with actually doing the work of creating safety in structural ways. So I guess that's kind of like a vague answer for a very specific question, but I guess part of what is difficult to like sort of categorize is that like it looks different. It can take the shape of so many different things, and so keeping this conversation active and making sure that we're asking folks who have been victimized what they need in order to feel safe is so important. And I think that can be part of a restorative conversation that happens before we actually are working with folks who have committed specific crimes related. Does that answer?
Yeah, it does. I think there's two trajectories that work simultaneously, and I think the accountability trajectory is one pathway, as well as I think that the repair work is the other pathway. In an ideal world, those two come together and work no longer simultaneously but collaboratively. And so I think, from my perspective, that being someone who practices and uses restorative circles all of the time, I think that it's important to, as a community, make a commitment to holding the spaces for those activities to begin as a one step in the process to expanding community-wide restorative justice practices.
Yeah, thank you for giving voice to that. That's a really important piece.
Thank you. And towards that end, I think quite a few people who are here today are here because they feel like because they have been harmed or victimized with break-ins. And so I encourage you to, in addition to any questions you have, name what you need to feel safe or to heal, or however you want to phrase that as you participate. You had a question?
Actually, I have a statement.
Great, thank you.
I appreciate the board. I live on Spruce Street / Ginkgo Lane. My neighbors, we've all are sick of it. I've been broken into 7 times in a year and a half. My tenants are violated. We've put up cameras, we've put up spotlights, we've called the police. You guys have done a great job, but it's not enough. We got elderly people that are getting broken into. People can't afford windshields, car windows. And I'll tell you now, I have such severe PTSD to come home and find a woman walking around my property, taking pictures for who knows. And when you confront them, you don't know what you're confronting. Are they gonna pull a gun on me? Are they gonna pull a knife on me? I have put on Facebook, I'm so sick of it, I'll take a baseball bat to these people's legs. Oh, you can't do that. These criminals have more, what's the word I want? They have more rights than we do, thank you. I have lived in this town for 45 years. I have never seen it as bad as it is. I understand about drugs. I understand about addictions. I understand about mental illness. But something has to happen. We take the cameras, they're too fuzzy. We go to court, they get their hands slapped, and they're back out doing it again. To be honest, let's go back to biblical days. Cut off a finger, 2 fingers, a hand. Make them accountable. They're homeless. Okay. That's not an excuse to break into our properties and make us feel unsafe.
Hi, I work in Brattleboro. I am a teacher. I have different things that I'd like to just bounce off. I think they need to be heard. The beginning of this meeting started with what is the root cause? And yes, we all understand mental illness, but the bigger, greater problem is drugs, and we all know that. As someone who used to shop at the co-op, I stopped going there just because it's a disgrace. I parked right across the way. I had my mom and daughter. Certainly neither of them or I need to witness people shooting up open public in the middle of the day. Open container, it's a problem. If people might be playing at a ball field and at the end of the game, working people might say, well, let's sit and have a beer. Well, I know firsthand that people have reported and cruisers were sent for someone who simply might sit by the woods and have a beer. Canal Street, Co-op, the bench by Goozers, they all sit open container. That's discriminating, really. Just people, we need to know that. It cannot be okay for someone who's homeless to break laws and then people who are working and really not abusing anything get in trouble. So that covers open container. Panhandling. Many towns who do not have this big of a problem do not allow it. Months ago, I tried to look up the rules for the town, and I can't speak to all of them, but it seemed like we had something and it's kind of crossed out. I didn't call, I can't hold the conversation to that, but it should not be allowed. We earn our money, we pay taxes on what we earn. So that should just bluntly not happen here in this town. Businesses, the co-op is important, but so isn't every business on this street, schools, private or public. they all need to be looked at. The damage that's happening because people don't want to park in the parking garage. People don't want to walk in town. They'll go elsewhere. I have a question, and I'm not sure if maybe Brandy, Star, I'm not sure. Needles, do we provide needles, clean needles for people?
What do you mean by we? You're talking about the actual
Nonprofits?
municipality?
In town, is there a safe place for users to go get clean
There
needles?
are organizations that do have clean needle programs, yes.
And may I ask, who picks them up off the street?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's not an actual crew who is labeled needle cleanup crew. I know that if police officers find them, they will pick them up. If people who are comfortable picking them up. The main problem that we have right now is we don't have a lot of needle boxes. So even if a town worker might have a container in their truck to put it in, or an organization that feels comfortable with needles might have a container, but a citizen who says, hey, I'm not afraid to pick up a needle, but then, where do I put this needle? That's what I see as a problem. And I've had people reach out to me say, hey, I've got no problem picking up needles, but I don't just walk around with a container to put things in.
So this, thank you for clarifying that, yes, there are places for them to receive clean needles.
Yes.
That in itself is a problem. People who issue the clean needles should be responsible, not putting the town workers or a regular person who sees one. They're hazardous. Fentanyl, if there's some on there, disease, please don't shake your head no, because it is dangerous and you should know that, and I will tell you that.
Disease is a problem, but I will not be able to allow the misinformation that fentanyl is spread by powdery touch. For fentanyl to go through your skin, it has to be chemically altered so that it can even be added to a patch for pain relief. The powder itself is innocuous to touch. And I just have to jump in and say that, but you are absolutely right. There are diseases that are bloodborne diseases that can certainly be present on a needle.
So I
just want to actually get one of your questions answered that hasn't been addressed yet.
Well, if
around...
I could just say one more thing,
Yes.
and then yes, you may. On that, I'm not going to say departments or share, but I do know that people have been trained who work in town to be careful. So maybe I misspoke as far as what the chemical is, but I want to go back to my statement that whoever issues these free needles, it should not be the police officers, the common man, the town workers. It should be whoever's giving them should have people who are trained with hazardous waste to pick them up. Or the users. Yes.
I have more to say, but I'm gonna so I wanna. You mentioned something about panhandling ordinances, and so I wanted to get some clarity on the ordinances related to panhandling, because that's actually a national legal conversation right now. And then I'm gonna have a few other people ask questions, and then we'll circle back to you. Okay. Who wants to panhandling ordinance? Peter, do you want to do that? Thank you.
So panhandling, it's actually really clear. Some of the other issues that we're grappling with around all the things that are being discussed today are not as clear. The act of being in a public place and asking someone if they'll give you money is protected under the First Amendment. And anywhere in America, it's a legal act. And places that discourage it, there are communities that discourage it, are walking a pretty precarious line when you get law enforcement involved in trying to get people to stop doing something that's simply and obviously protected by the First Amendment. So what we've tried to do in this community is a lot of dialogue in all different directions, in meetings like this and gatherings with folks around different aspects of police activity, as well as at select board meetings, as well as in more social service oriented settings. Try to help people deal with the personal interaction that's involved in that. Nobody has to give anybody any money. You can choose to or choose not to interact with a person who's asking for money. But the town is not going to put resources into trying to stop that activity in the way that we do put resources into crime prevention and law enforcement, because plain and simple, it's a legal thing to do.
I just want to say that I actually have to leave, and I hate to do that, but I have a work appointment, and so I just wanted to throw that out there at this time, that I'm going to be leaving in about 5 minutes, and I'm very sorry.
Thank you very much
You're
for coming. So I want to bring us back to break-ins because we only have a few minutes left in the forum. What I will say is that I think Tracy has made a really good point, and I would like to sort of make it a commitment with you, Tracy, about having a lot more forums in our community around quality of life and or criminal justice issues. I think that's a really important conversation for us to keep on having. So don't feel like this is the end. It's just the middle.
So that's kind of a nice segue to the thought I've had rolling around. I don't really know what, closer? Sorry, I've actually been sick, so I'm so sorry. The Feet neighborhood, Frost, Elliott, Elm Triangle, is that what? If I remember, I feel like there used to be, that was a really hard neighborhood. There was a lot of trouble. There had a lot of similar maybe issues. And again, I could be remembering this wrong, and I wonder if anyone could speak to that, because I'm thinking about solutions and how it went from, I think, a neighborhood watch perspective to how do we rally our neighborhood and really celebrate it as a place to live. And when I think about solutions, yes, there's lots of things that have been said today, and there's lots of things that need to happen with accountability. And then when I hear people talking about, like, but what can we do? Like, what can I do about this? I just wonder if there's other examples of things that neighborhoods have done. And I live in West Brattleboro, and I know we have the West Brattleboro Association. And so now I'm thinking, I wonder what the West Brattleboro Association can do. So I guess I just wondered if anyone on the panel or anyone here could speak to what have individual neighborhoods done to try to strengthen themselves as neighborhoods, not because it's your problem to solve necessarily, like someone's individual behavior, but because that's where you might have some influence and some power.
So I can't remember the person's name, but a number of years ago, there was a very strong Clark Canal organization. And I can't remember her name, but she organized, who? Peggy Longhill. Yes. And she organized kind of the neighborhood around some of the issues. She started the lunch program for kids, and so she was very active. So that is I think a really good example of how a neighborhood, I don't know what's happened to it in the meantime, but I know she was really active in doing that.
Thank you. Any other questions or ideas?
So my name is Michael Leonardo. I've lived in Brattleboro for my whole life, almost 46 years, and I have been dealing with this for 2 years or a little more. I live on Marlboro Ave, and back in January, it was one of the reported hardest hit streets in the town of Brattleboro. Police Chief Fitzgerald talked about the uptick of 225%. We've done all of the steps to try and protect ourselves. We feel we're at that line where we really don't have anything else to do. The lights, brighter lights, motion lights, alarm systems, motion sensors, security cameras. I personally am one that believes that the laws need to be tougher. I understand what Vermont and the legislature is trying to do. Yes, I do have a heart. I do feel for these people. But as a father of 3 children, I also have to take into consideration their safety. My vehicles are 75 and 85 feet in my yard. And I get a little emotional talking about it, okay? Because I can't do anything. I can't go out there and confront these people. If I do, what's going to happen? What do they have? What am I going to? How in trouble am I going to get? Okay, I have to set the example for my children, and a lot of people feel that. So I do believe that the laws need to be changed a little bit. Maybe something new needs to be written, needs to be stiffer Stiffer penalties, maybe. I understand you're not going to throw somebody in jail for stealing 50 cents. I don't think that's really what people are looking for. I think people are looking for making these subjects held accountable for violating your personal property, violating your space, violating your sanity, your safety. How your vehicle on your property is not, it's not illegal for them to go in your property. It's just mind-boggling. I don't understand how that fell through the cracks. This is not something that's been happening for only a few months. You're hearing more about it because of the serious uptick. That's my opinion. I think a lot of people feel the same. Like I said, it's been happening at my house for over 2 years. I think, it's just a lot more people are speaking up about it because they're fed up with it. And I think we're at that line. And what else? I understand, having compassion for drugs and addiction, depression, but I think there's got to be the other side of it too. We have to protect those families that aren't involved in that stuff. And I think that's where a lot of people are getting us upset about it, is we don't feel protected. I've used this before at the town select board meeting. The people that are committing these offenses, their rights are up here. And us as citizens and taxpayers that aren't committing these crimes are down here. And we need to get that flip-flopped. Thank you.
I think, following up on what Mike said, I think the people would like to hear a commitment from the legislators that you're going to go back to Montpelier after the vacation week and actually go out of your way to get this legislation passed, to get Notter's bill passed and get it done this year. It's try to see if you can't set a record for getting legislation through.
So in regards to that, the conversation around the bill that I introduced started last week, and as you know, we're taking a break this week because of town meeting, and I am doing the work. I'm doing everything that I can regarding this bill, and I do believe we're going to be taking a vote on it when we return, and then that is ultimately up to the chair of my committee, the Judiciary Committee, and then it has to go to the floor of the General Assembly, and then it goes to the Senate, and then and so on and so forth. But I'm working on it.
Maybe colleagues can help.
I hope so.
I think you should I'll say out loud that we are working. I mean, I think that Notter took the lead from the feedback to bring it into the committee, and it's appropriate for him to do so on the House side. I think all of us are interested in this particular bill, just because the way I see it, and slightly nuanced from what you were saying, Michael, but I think going back to what Chief Fitzgerald said, that it's a tool for them to intervene earlier, and I think that's a really important part of it. And the punishment, I think that the intervention is probably the disruption of the pattern is probably the most powerful thing that we should be thinking about. Is do they have all the tools necessary to intervene and break patterns of behavior? And then I want to give Jeanette a chance to speak to it, since she's going to be receiving something hopefully from the House within the next couple of weeks.
So once it passes the House, then it will come to the Judiciary Committee, and I sit on the Judiciary Committee. I'm not the chair, so I don't set the agenda. And I have to admit that I haven't seen the bill. The bill as introduced was just one line. I have no idea what the bill says now or what it'll say when it comes out of the House. So what we'll do is we'll get the bill, we'll look at it, we'll decide whether we agree with it, make changes. That always happens. And then, but I'm not the chair, so I don't set the agenda, but I will ask Senator Sears to make sure we take it up and look at it. And I can't commit to anything because I've never seen it yet. Thank you.
And I will make sure that the tape from this forum, which is being filmed by BCTV, is shared with both committees, so that all of your voices don't need to truck yourselves all the way up to Montpelier to be heard. but the time that you spent here today can make it up there too. Yes.
Who would you suggest the public speak to emphasize their interest in this law?
Reach out to the chairs of the committees.
And tell us who they are.
For the House Judiciary, it's Max. For the House Committee, it's Maxine Grad, and for the Senate, it is Dick Sears.
Senator Sears from from Bennington County. Wilmington is part of Bennington for that.
And just two other pieces of information, as Emily mentioned earlier, you can always call the Sergeant at Arms office at the State House to give a message to any of your representatives, and we get those pretty regularly. And you can email us, but also for tracking purposes, if you're interested in a particular bill, our websites are very current, and so Nodder introduced the bill as H923, and if you go to the website, you'll see it as introduced, and then when new drafts are written, you'll be able to find those drafts as they're written in real time. And so actually when our attorneys who write our legislation for us, when they finish with a draft and it's released to the committee for review, it's also simultaneously released to the general public through the website. So you can actually follow along pretty closely as
And
it moves.
I will post the links to where that bill is and then contact information on the Facebook event for today. How many people know how to find the Facebook event? Great, tell the people near you. Thanks. Okay.
Can I add
Yeah.
something about following it? So what else appears on the legislative website under that particular bill is all the testimony and all the information that's been given to the committee is all posted on the website. So if you have something you want to write to the committee, that will be posted on the website and people can see it, and that'll be part of the testimony. And any expert witnesses or anything like that, whoever comes in, all of that is posted on the website underneath that bill. So you can watch and see what the conversation is.
I just wanted to answer
thank you.
answer a question here.
Please.
I'm Tara O'Brien. I live on Maple Street, and I've been hit 3 times that I know of. My neighborhood by the hospital has been hit numerous times, repeatedly. What has helped our neighborhood is that a group of neighbors actually have an email group. So that whenever we see suspicious activities, there's either something noticed there or the line of my neighbors are on Facebook Message. And I do appreciate social media because that's how I found out there was activity in my neighborhood. So I went out and checked my car and found out my car had been rummaged through. Just having neighborhoods, just connections has helped us. And we reached out to the chief who did meet with us, and we appreciated that because we found out some really interesting information, which was one, some of our calls also were not being handled properly, which the chief swiftly acted upon. And I give you credit for that in adding some trainings for the dispatchers. I hope that becomes something consistent in all of their training going forward, not just for these dispatchers who were the ones who were either reprimanded or given attention to for the disrespect that we were given when we called. And one thing, I appreciate quick action. I was actually hit. I wrote a letter to all of you on reps, discovering that when I found out that my car was rummaged through, not only was it rummaged through, they damaged my glove compartment because of the fact that I was following everything that I was told to do. Don't leave valuables out, because the first time I was hit, they took valuables. The second time, they broke my glove compartment trying to get valuables. And I was perplexed. The third time was actually a week after I contacted you. And I ran into them coming into my driveway. Okay, the fear in me still lives in me. It's in my body. One of the suspects approached my car. I looked in their face. You know, if it were me 5 years ago, I don't know what I would have done then. It might not have been something that would be wise. However, I did get pictures of them. I shared them with the chief. It's just, I think this woman mentioned PTSD. There may be a lot of us living with that in this community. So 60 cents taken from our cars is not just 60 cents for some of us. And I know that personally. I know that with some of my friends who are being hit by this. So one of the reasons I want to see all of you at these next meetings, and I hope that happen, is it's great that you hear us. It's great that you see us. But I want you to feel us.
Yes.
Okay? People are feeling vulnerable. I am certainly against mass I can't say that word. Yeah, I'm certainly against it. I'm opposed to it. But when your community is coming out like this, speaking to you, you know, where's the accountability there? We want to feel like you're standing up for us when you're up in Montpelier, when you're doing the work, when you're on the select board. That's all I ask. So I hope these discussions continue. Thank you.
You can. It is.
Hi, Bob Odette, Brattleboro Reformer. I understand emotions. I wanted to get back down into a little of the nitty gritty and had a question for the chief. When we see a spike, an uptick like this, can we attribute this to one or two person, or are we concerned that there's a gang of roving marauders going through all our cars? Do you have any information you can share about this recent uptick and what we might see over the next few months?
I can't share more than what's already in the paper because they are ongoing investigations that are under litigation. To answer your question, I can say in the past, more times than not, it's attributed to a handful of individuals, not a ganging rove
When you say a handful?
of 3 to 5, maybe, somewhere around there. And it usually takes like the incubation period to all of a sudden we start seeing a rash here. They hit different areas. We start gathering data. We deploy our resources, and this cycle was pretty typical, 2 to 3 months cycle on how it happens like that. So.
I know that we have not said everything that can be said, but we're at 12, and that's when we said we were going to wrap up. And so I want to respect everyone's time. What I want to say in closing is first, thank you all for coming. It's really incredibly important for us to have these conversations with each other, to understand what's going on and craft solutions together, and to keep those doors open. And so I want to name a few pledges going out of the room and see if we want to add a few more before we walk away together. I think your legislators have said they're going to do their very best to push this legislation forward, but I want to name again that is a long process. And so will not, if it was the magical solution, it still won't happen overnight. And so other things are going to need to happen for us all to continue feeling safe in our communities, which is something that I know is really important to everyone in this room. And so we have that pledge. I think Tracy and I are going to work together to have many more forums like this on other issues that are sort of similar but different, and to continue doing that. Your 3 House representatives actually host community forums once a month on the second Saturday. Did I get it's the second Saturday? Yes? second Saturday of the month, right here in the library. And we really encourage you to come to those. We often only have like 2 or 3 people come, but we're really here every month to talk about whatever you want to talk about, both update you on what we're doing, but really hear what you want us to be working on. And so please come to those events, because this only works if we're all in it together, because we can't be acting in a vacuum. I'm wondering what, if someone from the select board wants to speak with sort of what your commitments are on this issue going forward, if you all want to speak to that, just so we can all walk away feeling like there's a next, what we know our orders are, or our priorities are.
So at the select board we have public. Thank you. I used to be a teacher. At the select board we have public participation at the beginning of every single meeting. That's a place for people to come to talk about things that aren't on the agenda. Another option is trying to get something on the agenda. To do that, you would email the town manager's office, or you email the select board chair or vice chair. Those are the 3 people that set the agenda for our meetings. You know, I think, like, I'm speaking for myself here, but the board tries to be as responsive to residents' concerns as we can be. Often that looks like referring it on to town staff. You know, the chief is working every day on police matters. The town manager's working every day on managing town operations. Your board members are lowly paid volunteers with jobs and lives, and we do our best. And also I know that sometimes when you need that immediate response, you might not get it, right? So I do my best to respond to things that need my immediate response quickly. Oftentimes we get emails to all 5 of us and it's not clear that you want a specific response. Sometimes it's like you're just letting folks know, and we share that information with all the people that need to have it. You know, we've got town meeting coming up in a few weeks' time. We have a body of people in this town that are committed to our community, and if you're not a town meeting member, I would encourage you to run to be a town meeting member. There might be open spaces this year that you can get in through caucus. Next year, you know, run for town meeting member. It's really important that as many voices are heard as possible. So that's what I think from the select board perspective.
Anyone else want to speak to sort of, from the panel, speak to ongoing commitments going forward? And I'm going to very rudely ask you to keep it to like 60 seconds or less.
Yep, real
Thank
quick,
you.
just if we're here to serve you, and if you're not getting the service that you expect, I want to hear about it, okay? If you have questions about anything that we're doing, our investigations and things of that nature, please call. If the officer does not return the call or the supervisor does not return the call, I want to hear about it, okay? And if you want to set an appointment to sit down at any time, please just let me know, because truly we're here to serve you.
257-2860 is the number of my office.
I'll keep this almost as quick. I'll try to. So I believe in both the rehabilitative aspect of this as well as the accountability aspect of this. I want to see, people who are dealing with drug abuse or mental health issues, I want to see them as productive members of society. But also sometimes you have to take that accountability route as well. And like I already stated, I'm very dedicated to this piece of legislation that's in judiciary right now. And as has already been said, I'm hoping to see a vote on it in the next week or two.
You already, Tristan? Sorry. Okay. And then the last thing is, for folks who are forming community associations or already have people that you're coming together with in your neighborhood, I really encourage you to reach out to the community resources that are already here on that issue. So if as a neighborhood association or might someday be a neighborhood association, you have questions about the police, reach out to the police department. If you have questions about what drug treatment looks like in our community or what needle programs look like in our community, reach out to Turning Point. And so there really are resources to connect you with for almost any issue that you're grappling with as a neighborhood. And so if that is something that as a community association or as a neighborhood or even as 3 people you want to learn more about, I think you could probably reach out to anyone here to find out what those extra other resources are, including the town manager's office. So we all talk to each other a lot, and so can help connect you. If you just sort of start with one person, we can move out from there. Because being connected to each other is a lot of what's going to make a difference for the next few years in Brattleboro. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming. We're going to keep doing this, and I really appreciate you taking the time on this Saturday.